Hello there. I'm Larry Jackson. I'm the writer, director, and producer of Shades Connected Interactive, also known as Overcoming American Ethnic Implicit Bias, and in some circles, Overcoming American Racial Implicit Bias. This is a video that will have several segments in it that will be dealing with my experiences over some 50, 60, 70 years dealing with racial implicit bias. These experiences uh, surround themselves with what we call disrespect, and the elements of disrespect are uh, content of speech, tone of voice, and gestures. And you will see these elements popping out in the segments that follow this segment and how I dealt with them. So the theme here is overcoming American implicit ethnic and racial biases. And at the conclusion, I'll have workable solutions for you to employ once you understand the content of this video. So with that, we will proceed to the next segment. As you may know from my resume, I've spent 20 years off and on teaching religious education in a number of Catholic parishes. This part of the presentation, we're talking about different kinds of racial prejudice. This particular incident deals with internal racial prejudice. That's prejudice within the ethnic group. So I had about 20 to 25 kids in each of my classes. I'm a pretty popular teacher from the standpoint that I was the catechist that did substantial lesson planning. Most of the time when I was by myself, I spent all Saturday preparing a lesson plan for a 1 hour lesson on Sunday. And in this particular class, I had kids from all different racial groups: black kids, white kids, Hispanic kids, Asian kids. In this particular group of kids, there was about 5 different Hispanic kids. And the leader of this particular subgroup was a boy that was really a nice kid. He and his friends apparently hung together real well. He was a baseball player. And there was another boy who was also, unbeknownst to me, Hispanic. I say that because he was blonde haired, very fair skinned, and looked typically Caucasian. And when I heard him speak Spanish, that's when I knew that there was a Spanish blood in his life, because he spoke Spanish very fluently. Anyway, I have these boys and girls introduce themselves at the beginning of the class. They tell little things about themselves. One of those things is what school they attended. These children, these teens, I say, I don't like to call them children because they're about 14 years old, so I give them a little more respect and more responsibility. So these teams go to about 4 or 5 different middle schools or junior high schools. And this particular boy was going to a different middle school or junior high school than the other 4 or 5 kids in this other group. And So there was a little bit of a problem. He was being excluded. I could see that, and by this group, and I would do what I could do, make every effort that I could do to bring him back into the group. So one day he came to school or came to class with another boy, Caucasian boy. He was a short kid, and this boy came into the class and asked me, Mr. Jackson, can I be in this class? And I said to him, well, this was almost the end of the class. It was like the second to the last meeting. It was like in May, sometime in May. And I said to him, well, are you Catholic? And he said, yes. And I said, well, what parish do you go to? And he couldn't come up with a parish. So I said, well, okay, I guess you can, sit down and see if you want to be in this class. So we had the class, we went through the lesson plan, did whatever activities I had planned and so forth. And then the classrooms that I use are the classrooms of the Catholic schools. So they're not my classroom. I'm borrowing the classroom for that one Sunday or for the Sunday meetings that we have. So I have to bring my supplies with me and then take them home. So I have the students take the supplies down to, I usually have a big box, I have them take the supplies down to my car, and I pack the supplies into the trunk of the car. So I'm doing that, and I can see with the eyes in the back of my head that there is a little tussle going on behind me. And I turn around and I go, what are you guys doing? And it's this little kid that was staring up at me with these big brown eyes asking me, Mr. Jackson, can I be in this class? And they're tussling, and he starts to explain what it was that they were doing. He says, well, this guy did this to me, and that guy did that to my friend, and this guy did this, and I just said, oh, hell no. And I said, wait a minute. I said, first of all, this is a religious education class. We don't cuss in this class. And I said, second of all, fighting is not going to get you anything. It's not going to do any benefit for you at all. And as I learned later, they took that with whatever grain of salt they could and went on about their business. At least they stopped the fighting. I learned later that the boy that was being excluded, the boy that looked predominantly Caucasian, brought this boy to class as his hitman to deal with the issues of being excluded from this Hispanic group. I'll talk more about this later on in our presentation. In this segment, I'm dealing with sexual harassment. Believe it or not, sexual harassment takes place in schools as early as grammar school. In this particular incident, there was a boy in my class that I had met 3 years earlier. Now, I teach the 8th grade, so I met him, I think, when he was in the 5th grade. I was at one of the parish carnivals, and he came up to me, and he says, he gave his name, and proceeded to talk. We talked for, about a half an hour about different things at the school and in the Santa Monica neighborhood, living at the beach, surfing, and so forth and so on. And then 3 years later, lo and behold, here he comes into my classroom as a student. And I recognized his name because of my vision problems. I typically don't recognize kids or students that I see years later for 2 reasons. One, they usually change in their appearance, and 2, I just have a better recollection of names and families than I do of appearances. I have a pretty good memory going back to ad infinitum, as you may have discovered. Anyway, I'm teaching this class. We're going over a particular point in the lesson plan. And again, in the eyes in the back of my head, I see this girl going at it with this boy. She's swinging at him. She's throwing punches left and right. And I'm going, wait a minute. This is a religious education class. We're not supposed to be fighting. And, and I said, what is the problem here? And she says, I don't like him anymore. And I said, well, that may be, but you cannot be swinging at him. And so I asked him what the problem was. I said, I'll check with you after class. Well, I had observed him touching her in an inappropriate place. And as I was going to say something to him, he stopped doing that. And that was previous to her swinging at him. So I was going to keep him after class anyway for that. And I did. I kept him after class, and we walked around the campus. And I told him this. I said, you know, I saw you put your hands on her body in an inappropriate place. And you cannot do that. And I said, all she has to do is go home and tell her parents what you did. And you could be in juvenile hall. So I talked a little further with him, and I said, now, he says, well, she's my girlfriend. I said, I don't care who she is. You don't put your hands in places that are inappropriate. Keep your hands to yourself. I said, I don't ever want to see you do that again. And if I do see you do that, I'm going to tell your parents, your mother, and your father, and we're going to deal with this issue until you stop. He says, don't tell my dad, don't tell my dad. I'll do anything you say, anything you want, just don't tell my dad. That was a little surprising to me because I saw him earlier in another class be really disrespectful to his dad. And his dad is someone that is from a foreign country, and I believe English is a second language to him. And he came in the class with his son I think, just to see him in the classroom. And his son kind of pushed him out of the classroom and was telling him in his native language something that sounded pretty rude to me. So I took him aside then and explained that he cannot do that. But this sexual harassment, where he was putting his hands in places on this girl because supposedly she was his girlfriend, was inappropriate and was dealt with rather lickety-split, rather expeditiously at that time. And this is something that you may see or have known about. Maybe some of your children have come home and revealed that something like this had happened at their school. The important thing is that you deal with it effectively, you make sure that they know it's not appropriate and that it should not happen again. This segment is on a mixture of racism or racial prejudice and religion, believe it or not. So one of my classes, I had another boy who was Caucasian and the youngest brother of two other boys that I had in my class in previous years. And as a result of that, I and his parents become pretty good friends, primarily because we did some of the same volunteer work. This religious education that I've done for 20 years was on a volunteer basis. But we did a lot of volunteer work. We have the same moral fiber in regards to what's right and what's wrong and why it's right and why it's wrong. In any event, this is the number 3 son, and we're having a discussion, and out of the discussion, out of nowhere, he asks me the question, Mr. Jackson, is God white? And I was shocked to go, wait a minute, now this kid is asking a question for a reason, and the reason is probably inappropriate. Now, this boy goes to the middle school closest to Santa Monica High School, and his brothers go to Santa Monica High School. At that time, fully integrated, and there were kids from different ethnic backgrounds with different degrees of moral fiber. Some not so good, some very good, and so forth. So I'm, sure that he's heard the N-word coming from people of African American descent, and so forth. And I'm sure that he has some reason for feeling a degree of inferiority. And that is why he asked the question. He, knowing that I knew his parents real well, didn't serve him too good, because I said to him, I don't know why you asked that question, but I don't know the answer, but I'll find out what the answer is. And I'm also going to find out why you asked the question. So, I talked to my DRE, Director of Religious Education, told her about what had happened, and we looked at it in this perspective. In the Catholic religion, we believe that God created man in his image, in God's image. So that was a pretty good answer to the question. I went back and said, God is white, he's black, he's Asian, he's Hispanic, he's whatever we are. And he didn't quite know how to deal with that. It didn't answer the question the way he wanted the question answered, but it did answer the question. And then I said, now, I kind of get a feeling as to why you asked that question. And I think that you are having a little bit more of a problem dealing with people of other races than your brothers are. And I would say to you, what would you say if I told your mother about the question you asked and why you asked it? And again, I get this response, oh, don't tell my mom, don't tell my mom. And I said, well, I could tell your dad. Oh, don't tell my dad, definitely don't tell my dad. And I said, well, why? And I said, did you have a really legitimate reason for asking that question? Or was it just you being a smart aleck? And he said he had to confess, well, I guess I was being a smart aleck. And I said, well, does it really make a difference what color we think God is? If you look at the different statues and so forth around the world, you'll see that Jesus can be different colors. In the United States, you might see him mostly looking like you. In some other South American countries, he may be a little more brown skinned. And in some African countries, he may be very dark skinned. It's all about being created in the image of God. And that means there is no difference in regards to race. And as the soap commercial goes, and I'll challenge everyone to try to recall this soap commercial. It probably is something that was said way before some of you were born. But we are 99 and 44 100% the same. That's all I have on this segment. I'll talk more about this later in the presentation. On the street at all because of how early it was. And it was a Sunday morning. In any event, I was in the number 2 lane, the lane that was second to the lane on the right next to the curb. And we were stopped at a red light. And I was about maybe 20 feet from the limit line. And I decided that I was going to make a right turn to go to another stop before we headed home. I think maybe to get donuts or something. Um, and my boys that were in the car with me were very close to approaching driving age. And so as a result, of course, they're going to critique Dad in terms of his driving, my driving. So, so I'm at this intersection and I decide I'm going to make a right turn. I put my right signal on and I move over into the right lane. And they're, oh, Dad, you shouldn't do that. You can't do that. That's illegal. They say that's illegal. And I said, what are you talking about? I just put my signal on, move over to the right lane, and I made my right turn. Well, as soon as I made my right turn, there's a black and white sheriff's car, deputy car behind me. And they said, oh, we told you, we told you. So I pulled over. And, and I'm looking in my rearview mirror, and in this car is 4 deputies. And the driving deputy gets out, and he walks up to the car. I roll down the window, I got my driver's license out, and I'm ready to tell him my version of why I made this right turn. And he says to me, before you start arguing, I'm not going to give you a ticket. So I make a mental reservation. Well, I haven't got nothing to say then if you're not going to give me a ticket. And so he says to me, but you do realize that you cannot make a right turn from the middle lane. And I says, think to myself, that's not what I did. But yeah, I said, yes, that's right, I do know that. And he says, okay, that's all I wanted to know. And we just bid each other have a nice day, and he went on about his business. And I'm sure that the rest of the day, probably the 4 deputies in that car talked about what I did. He wanted to know, why did you pull over? Why did you pull over? And I told him, I said, well, my boys were critiquing my driving, and they told me that I was doing something wrong, and I told them I wasn't. When I saw you behind me, I just decided I'd pull over and we would deal with it. And so he went on about his business, kind of shaking his head like, I've never seen that before. And of course, during the rest of the day, the boys had to tell the rest of the family what my driving experience was. So that was an incident where in dealing with the police, of course, you want to pass what is called the attitude test. What I have told my boys and girls, that when you're pulled over by the police, know your rights, but be respectful, be courteous, and 9 times out of 10, they'll be courteous back to you. You will have the incident where there is somebody that's having a bad day, and they might not be as courteous as you want them to be, but then consider all the things that they go through during their day. I had another incident, which is kind of a funny one. During my early days in my practice, one of the things I did was tax returns, and I had a number of deputies for clients, and I also had an LAPD training officer for clients. Anyway, I'm working on the taxes, and during the middle of the day, and this deputy comes running in. He says, "You got my taxes ready? You got my taxes ready?" And you know, sometimes they live from paycheck to paycheck. And I said, well, they're not quite ready yet, but they will be ready, within about an hour. And he says, well, I gotta go. We got a drug bust to do. And I said, well, why do you have to hurry? There'll be 14 other guys there. And he goes, well, they can't do anything till I get there. So I said, well, you come back when you finish your drug bust, and we'll have your taxes for you. So that's what I have in this segment. There are a couple of other segments that I will be talking about that did not go quite as well. And you'll see that later on in this presentation. Well, sooner than I thought, we are dealing now with an incident with law enforcement that did not go well for me. This is an incident, actually it's a courtroom incident. One of the things that I did in my volunteer career, 54 years of that, is mentored at-risk young boys or young men. kids that would get themselves in trouble with the law in one degree or another. And I have an attorney who is a criminal attorney. Most of the attorneys that I have had have been business attorneys dealing with contracts and business law and so forth. In this case, because this boy got himself into trouble with the police, he ended up in a felony stop and also was severely beaten by the police and was ended up charged, but in that particular case, the charges were all dropped or dismissed. Primarily, we think because of the police beating that he took. But in any case, this was another case where I went to court, and before I went off to college, I was a LA County employee. I worked at the General Hospital and I worked at the Hall of Records. And in working at the Hall of Records, in those days, from time to time, you would come in contact with the marshals, the LA County marshals. And they were pretty nice people, I mean, regular people, just like you, just like me. And sometimes I would, during my career, I would end up in small claims court. Either I'd have a claim against somebody else or they'd have a claim against me and we'd go to court and argue about it. And being a county employee, previous county employee, and kind of rubbing elbows with the marshals, you know, you begin to know each other pretty well and so forth. And so you kind of like, you know, comrades. We're both working for the county. One of the worst places you can work, but we work for the county. And so anyway, I went into this courtroom and to see if I was in the right place for this particular boy that I was mentoring, to see what his status was going to be. And I walked in the courtroom. There was something going on. There was a hearing going on, and I just walked over to the deputy. He was on one side of the gate, and I was on the other side. And I just kind of whispered to him, I'm looking for this particular defendant. Am I in the right courtroom? Before I could get all of that out of my mouth, from the bench, this old white guy judge yells, "Sit down!" And I go, "Oh my God, are you talking to me?" And the deputy kind of pointed, and so I went and sat down. And I couldn't believe that he did what he did. Now, I have to say that I had not been in this kind of a courtroom before. There was a 187 trial going on. That was a murder trial, and the defendant was sitting at the table, and there was a witness on the stand, and she was being, as I could see later as I'm sitting down, she was being intimidated by this defendant. So much so that the deputy had to take his chair and turn it in the other direction, because in our system of justice, the defendant has a right to face his accusers, but he doesn't have the right to intimidate his accusers, and that's what was happening. Nevertheless, that had nothing to do with me walking into the courtroom the way I did, and very quietly went up to the deputy and asked him a question. And then later on in the hearing, as the hearing closed, the judge said, "Who is that guy back there in the back of the room? I want to know who he is." And the lawyer for my mentee turned around and saw me, and he said, "Oh, that's Mr. Jackson. He's his mentor." And at that point, the boy that I was mentoring kind of got a lucky break, because the judge then had to recuse himself, and he had to take himself off the case and move the case to another courtroom. So that was that particular incident. It was not a pleasant incident for me. I thought that this judge did not have the appropriate judicial temperament. And I said to the lawyer out in the hallway, I said, does he realize that there is a presiding judge that I could go to and report his inappropriate conduct? The lawyer says, oh, he has so much money, he doesn't care, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, then maybe he shouldn't care about being a judge. Maybe he should retire and do something else. But I said, that was inappropriate behavior. And I think that sometimes judges act that way because they have the deputy in there that if you do the wrong thing, they can put you in jail, they can lock you up. Some people who behave inappropriately in a courtroom come that close. I've seen it come that close to the judge saying you're going to spend some time in jail for being disrespectful. So again, this is something that I took my kids to when they were, small grammar school kids to court to see how courtrooms work and how the judges' authority rules, and that they have deputies there to keep order, and the defendants do have their right to their trial and their day in court, and the prosecutor has the duty to prosecute the case. And of course, the defendant has his lawyer to defend his case. So that's it for now. That's one incident. There's a couple more incidents that I'll talk about coming up later. So this segment is on overcharge or false charge of an incident. This is an incident where one of my sons comes home from high school, going to a Catholic high school, and reveals that he was sent to the office for some sort of an incident. When I questioned him about this incident, what it was about, and so forth, he said he was sent to the office for sexual harassment. I go, oh my goodness. Now this is way back. This is before I was teaching religious education in Santa Monica. So this was maybe 10 or 15 years before that. And we delve deeper into this subject, why he was sent to the office for sexual harassment. And he said that he and another boy were fighting over a seat. Who was going to get this seat first, and he called this boy a faggot, and the teacher sent him to the office for sexual harassment. And he went to the office. This tells you, how long ago this was. This was during the first O.J. Simpson trial. And in the office at that time, manning the office was the head PE teacher. And this boy, my son, never got into trouble all through his school career. And so he was surprised. What are you doing in here? Well, the teacher says, what are you doing in here? He says, I got sent to the office. He said, what for? He said, for sexual harassment. He goes, what? He said, well, what did you do? He said, well, we were fighting over this seat, who's going to get it first, and I called this boy a fag. And he goes, oh, sit down. He says, sit down, let's just watch OJ. So the teacher just kind of blew it off. But when I heard about it, I counseled him to say that this is something that, of course, you should not say. I know that you high school kids, you say this kind of thing all the time. You tease each other, or you call each other names that are inappropriate. But in my day, we did this outside the earshot of adults. One of the words we used to say was bitchin'. And if we said that in front of an adult, they would assume that we said the other word, and what it would break loose. And so, I told him that, of course, this boy has a right to be whatever he chooses to be, and he shouldn't be harassed or shouldn't be teased for whatever he is or is not. And as a matter of fact, you don't know what he was. So he took that with a grain of salt, and that was the end of that particular incident. This is a story about police misconduct. I was traveling on the Ventura Freeway one day. It was kind of a misty day, starting to rain, and the traffic is going slow. It's bumper to bumper. Everybody is wanting to drive as close as they can to the next car because they didn't want to let any other drivers in their lane. And I was kind of participating in this, but not to any degree of to any extent that was terribly off key. Anyway, the traffic came to a halt, and I stopped, and the car behind me didn't stop and hit me, rear-ended me. I thought, oh, okay, here we go. So I pull over, and she pulls over. She's got a car full of a bunch of junk, I think some animals in the back seat. So I said, all right, well, let me get your driver's license and insurance information. And to my surprise, she refused. She said, it's not my fault. You stopped too soon. I go, okay. I think California law says if you hit somebody in the rear, it's your fault because you're traveling too close. But I didn't tell her that. I just said, well, either give me your driver's license and the information I need, or we'll just have to wait for the police to come, and then I'll get it at that time. So she decided we're going to wait for the police. Well, it wasn't too long, maybe a couple minutes, and two motorcycle policemen pulled up, two highway patrol motorcycles. And I told them what the situation was. I said she hit me in the rear. I asked her for her driver's license and insurance, and she wouldn't give it to me. And so the police went to her and took her side of the story. And I think she told the policeman not to give me her actual license and insurance. So he held it in his hand and he said, well, here it is. And this read off to me what was on it and so forth. And I said, well, that's fine. And then he said, and I'm kind of a little bit upset about this because in a normal situation, you would give if you hit somebody, you trade information, you give them your license and they give you your license, and you trade information and go on about your way. She was claiming that it was my fault because I stopped too soon. I said, just let the insurance companies deal with it. They'll figure out whose fault it is, and they'll take care of the damages. And then the policeman said to me, of course I'm a little upset, and he says to me, I have to protect her from your anger. And I said to him, I said, and when are you going to protect me? I said, I'm the one that got injured here, and all I did was ask for her information, her insurance and driver's license, and we would have been on our way. She refused to do that, and now you're involved. And when I said, when are you going to protect me? That's when there was this big, long, pregnant pause, because I think he realized that as the injured party and as a person of color, and of course these people, the policemen were Caucasian and she was Caucasian, and they just didn't want to yield to my request that she give me the appropriate information. And after that, that pregnant pause, and he was a little shocked that what I said, and he didn't have an answer. He didn't have an answer to say, well, I'm going to protect you now or later or yesterday or tomorrow. I thanked him very much, and off we went on our way. That incident didn't generate a report, but the next one I'll tell you about did generate a report. Now, this segment is about my living in the San Fernando Valley. I lived there in the San Fernando Valley for about 17 years in the 70s and 80s. And we were also there during the time of the busing controversy, and probably one of the few first black families, in our case, multiracial family, that lived in the San Fernando Valley at that time. Several incidents had occurred. We had one incident where I was chased home by a group of teenagers in a car. I was making a left turn off of a boulevard onto a small street, and this car came flying across the boulevard. Of course, he was trying to get across the boulevard before the traffic came, and almost rear-ended me. And I pulled over, and I guess he didn't like the way I pulled over, and they started to follow me. Well, we lived in a cul-de-sac at that time, and he followed me through the cul-de-sac. And I quite wasn't sure what the heck were these guys going to do. So I got out of my car and opened my trunk real quick to pull out some protection. And all of a sudden the N-word started flying, and we're going to get you for this, and we're going to get you for that. And my neighbor across the street and his son was observing the whole thing. So when it got to that point, I said, well, I've got to call the police because I don't know what these guys are up to. So I called the police, and they came. My neighbors had written down their license plate number, and we gave that to them. They said, well, we know who these kids are. We're going to go over and talk to them. And so that was a positive reaction from my involvement with the police in that incident. Later on, we had some woman come to the door while I was at work and approached my wife and wanted to know, now this is 1971, 72, 71 I think, and wanted to know if there was a colored boy that could cut her lawn that lived in our house. Well, we only had one child, I think, at that time. I think she was about 18 or 19 months old, 17 months, 15 months old. So there was no boys there, no colored boys there. I don't know where she got that information, but in any event, that was her response. And then, amongst other contacts that I had with the police, I counted them in that 17 years. I had 17 contacts. I got one ticket. So there's something wrong with those statistics, but that's what happened. Anyway, I was getting tired of this, being stopped and so forth, and questioned and so forth. I wasn't stopped, questioned, and frisked. It wasn't New York, but it was irritating. So at one point, my wife was working at Copper Penny to make extra money, and she was working the night shift. So I'd go pick her up. I'm watching the kids. I think we had 2 children at that time. I'm watching the kids and sleeping or whatever. I go pick her up at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, which is also when the bars close. And so I pull out of the driveway after I pick her up, and it starts to drizzle, starts to rain. And lo and behold, I pulled out of the driveway in front of a cop. But I looked to see if his bumper had dipped. That would mean that he hit the brakes, and it didn't dip. We drove about maybe 3 or 4 blocks, and it started to rain a little bit. It started to sprinkle. And when it started to sprinkle, I went over the white line, the line that divides one lane from another, but not the yellow line, not the double yellow, the white line. Next thing I know, the Irish lights are on. And you know what those are. So I pull over. I go, what? And this was my mistake. My words were, what are you pulling me over for? Not too good in the attitude test, but and he says, well, get out of the car. And I got out of the car. And he says, well, we think you've been drinking. I said, I haven't been drinking. I just picked up my wife. I was sleeping. And he said, well, you went over the white line. And I said, that's when it started to sprinkle. He said, before the rain. There was two cops. One, before the rain, before the rain. I said, okay, these guys are trying to hassle me again. So I said, well, I didn't go over the white line, but if I did, it would have been because of the rain. And he says, well, he puts his hand up and he says, blow into my hand. And I said, all right. I blew into his hand. And boy, I must have had bad breath. I hadn't brushed my teeth or anything. I just got up and went and picked her up. And I was going to get back and go back to sleep. And he says, okay, I'm going to kick you loose. And I said, kick me loose? You didn't have anything to be stopping me for in the first place. Another bad move on my part. I shouldn't have said that. And then the other cop, this is two squad cars that pulled up. The one that stopped me and then another one that pulled up. And he's standing there with his foot on his bumper. And he says, you better be quiet or we're going to take you in for disturbing the peace. And I go, okay. So now I'm disturbing the peace. I said, all right, enough is enough. I'm tired of this. So I said to my wife, give me a pad and pencil that's in the glove compartment. So she gives me the pad and pencil and I write down their license plate numbers. I don't say anything to them. I don't ask them for their badge number or their name or anything. I write down the license plate numbers of the cars. I go home and I call the watch commander at the West Valley station. I tell him, this is what's happened. I said, this is happening far too much. I am tired of this. I want to file a complaint. So they behaved inappropriately. They were trying to accuse me of something I didn't do. And they have the power to arrest me, falsely arrest me. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I want to file a complaint. So the watch commander says, okay, I'll send over a sergeant to talk to you. And I said, okay. So this is like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So the sergeant comes in and he says, okay, he starts off with, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to talk you out of filing a complaint. And I said, that's not going to happen. I said, this is inappropriate harassment and I'm tired of it. It's been a number of years that this has been happening to me in the San Fernando Valley, and it shouldn't happen, and I'm tired of it. So I want to file a complaint. So he said to me, he says, well, I'm not going to take a complaint. And I said, okay, go on about your business. He left. The next day, I'm remembering this, the next day I wrote a letter to the mayor of Los Angeles, who at that time, this was before Tom Bradley. This was Yorty. Sam Yorty was the mayor. And I wrote a letter and I described all the things that had happened to me, being stopped by the police 17 times and getting 1 ticket. And Yorty wrote me a letter back and he said, we are going to be investigating this. If what is happening to you is really happening, we're going to put a stop to it. And lo and behold, after that, cops would go by me, and I guess they got my description of my car and so forth, because they never bothered me again from that point forward. A couple of times I thought, dude, did I do something wrong? Did I make the right turn wrong or something? And they just never bothered me at that point. So, writing a letter, keeping your cool, and writing a letter sometimes have real positive results. That's all I have on this segment. This is a couple of other incidents that happened while we were living in the San Fernando Valley in the 70s. We belonged to a group, a marriage group at our church. And this group would have, kind of like a weekend outing. And then after this weekend outing, people would come back from the weekend outing. And those those couples that had been on this outing before would meet them at someone's house. It'd be like a homecoming where all the couples would meet the couples that are coming off this weekend. And there would be discussions and activities about what happened at their weekend. So we're there, and I think we had one of our young children with us. They were, an infant, and we had a little porta bed that we took her in, and we participated in this homecoming weekend, or homecoming meeting with these couples that are coming off this weekend. So they're starting to talk, and one of the guys there, one of the couples, the male counterpart of the couple, had this afro. He's a Caucasian guy, and this, of course, is in the the 70s, and it's not usual, or it's unusual to see a Caucasian guy with an afro. So that was kind of the subject matter that people were commenting, and he was commenting back and talking about how he took care of it. And what he said was, all I do is pull out my inward comb and take care of it. And when I heard that, and of course all the other people heard it too, I stared at him, and he stared back at me with this angry look on his face. And his wife threw her head down in shame. And I said, that's enough of that. Well, we were in a pretty good real estate market at that time. The next day, I put my house up for sale. And I said, this is not the parish that I want to be in, if this is the kind of behavior that someone should have said that was inappropriate. You shouldn't have said something like that. You need to apologize. No one said anything. The next Sunday, at that time I was running the youth guitar mass. I had about a dozen kids that were playing the guitar and singing and coming to my house for practice on a weekly basis, and then we would have the guitar mass. So we're at the mass, and after mass, the leader of this group, of this marriage group, came up to me and he says, "Oh, we want to have you. We want you to stay in the group. We want to have you in the group." This guy that made this inappropriate comment, his name was Buzz. It was a nickname. And I said, "You got Buzz. You can have him. I don't think this is something that I want to be involved in." And I told him, I said, somebody should have said something. That was inappropriate behavior on his part. He should never have said something like that. And they tried to explain that he deals with a lot of inner city youth and blah, blah, blah. And I said, that's no excuse. That was inappropriate. He shouldn't have said what he said. And he shouldn't have behaved afterwards the way he behaved. And that was one incident. We moved from there, from the, what is it called, from the, out of the frying pan into the fire. So we moved from there to another community in Canoga Park. And there, apparently there was someone who lived across the street from the house that we lived in, an African-American group, I don't believe it was a family, that were pretty rowdy. So I guess they left, and I guess when we moved in, I guess they thought we were going to be as rowdy as they were. Well, that wasn't the case. But while we were there, somebody tried to scroll the N word in indelible black something ink on my driveway. They put animal excrement on my car doors, and then they broke into our house when we moved and stole my radio. These are the kinds of things that happened in the 70s and 80s in the San Fernando Valley. And at that time, of course, the busing issue was a hot issue. I don't know if that's an excuse. It certainly is a reason, but it's not an excuse for that kind of behavior. The last thing I'll tell you about was a priest during a mass at another parish that we were in made the statement that we had some visitors from Africa, and he made the statement that he didn't know or couldn't tell the difference from these African visitors and people in South Central. Well, of course, when I heard that afterwards, I approached him and I said, what you said was inappropriate, especially to this group of people. This is something that you should not have said. And he said, well, you're calling me a racist. I said, I'm not saying a word. I told you what you did. I told you it was inappropriate. If you think that you are a racist, then that's your problem. That's something that you need to clean up. I'm just holding up the mirror. If you don't like the image, you need to clean up your act. So that was our experience in the San Fernando Valley, other than there was an incident which really took the cake, and that was my daughter's going to what turned out to be a private school. I thought it was a Catholic high school. It was a private school run by Catholic brothers, is what I was told by the Archdiocese. Anyway, they were in a class, a biology class, and this teacher, this biology teacher, behaving inappropriately, told this class of 15 and 16-year-old kids that he could say anything he wanted to about biology because he wasn't a priest, he wasn't a religious, and he could tell them the real truths about biology. So he would draw naked people on the blackboard, and of course, here again, one of the boys asked an inappropriate question. The question he asked was, what does black people's pubic hair look like? And the teacher, of course, after saying that his roommate was a porn star, said that he didn't know and he didn't want to find out. And so my two daughters who were in his class, they were in two separate classes, came home and they didn't know whether to tell me or not. My wife said, well, we don't know what happened, how he's going to deal with this. So they told me, and of course, I went right through the overhead and called the school, and I said, I need to talk to the principal about this incident. And this is the second incident that has happened at this school. The first incident, my daughter saved her babysitting money and went to a dance at the junior high school, and there was a Caucasian kid jumping up and down, yelling, I am an anti-N-word. And when I heard about that, I, of course, went down to the school and said, this is inappropriate behavior. You have something in your rules and regulations that says that any student that makes life difficult for any other student is subject to being removed or expelled from the school. And I want this investigated, and I want something to happen. Well, the second incident, the principal was not being cooperative with me, and I found out later that he was upset with me because I kept one of the girls home from an activity because her grades were falling, and he thought that I shouldn't have done that. In other words, he wanted to be the parent instead of the school administrator, and I wasn't having any of that. So one thing led to another. He was ducking my calls. He wouldn't see me. So I finally said, all right, this is it. Enough is enough. Either we deal with this issue or I'm pulling my girls out of the school. And he said, well, I'm busy. I said, okay, that's it. Get my girls, call them to the office. They're leaving the school right now. So, so they came to the office. They knew that Dad was upset. And I told them, go to your lockers, get everything out of your lockers that's yours. Leave any books or any materials that belong to the school here. And I went to where I paid the tuition, and I said I had given them a promissory note. I said, I want that promissory note back. I'm pulling my kids out of this school. This is an inappropriate behavior, and I'm not standing for it anymore. At that point, the principal wanted to know if there was anything he could do. My daughter said, "Yeah, you can help me get my stuff out of my locker." And I said, told him why I wanted to meet with him. And again, there was this pregnant pause when he found out what this teacher was doing. Now, they didn't do anything. When other parents heard about me pulling my girls out of this school, they knew that I was credible and that the Jackson family doesn't do things half-wittedly. And they wanted to know what happened. Well, they asked their kids, their girls and boys told them what this teacher was doing. So a group of the parents, some of my friends, Caucasian parents, went to the school and did kind of a sit-in. They said they were going to talk to the principal. They were not leaving until they talked to the principal and find out what happened. Why did Jacksons pull their kids out of the school? And so they found out. I had my girls sit down and write down every inappropriate thing that this teacher had done and said. And they came up with a 2-page list of everything that he had done and said, things that he'd written on the blackboard, inappropriate drawings, inappropriate remarks. And finally, about 2 weeks later, they finally fired the teacher. Now, they must have not done anything else because the teacher got a job at LA Unified. And lo and behold, about 15 or 20 years later, I hear his name come over the news. At this point, my daughter second daughter has finished UCLA with honors, got into UCLA, was told by one of her Caucasian schoolmates in high school that she got into UCLA because she was black. And that proved not to be true because she finished UCLA, graduated UCLA in 5 years with honors. She had so many ribbons and sashes on her graduation gown that one of her friends, one boy came up to her and said, "I feel like I need to salute you." She got admitted to UCSF Medical School, which is a very difficult school to get into, according to a number of medical professionals that I know, and graduated with honors there. So she didn't get in because she was black. She got in because she was an honor student. But in any event, I heard this guy's name come over the air as someone that was being charged with 50 counts of lewd and lascivious behavior in front of third and fourth grade students at a public school in LA Unified in Los Angeles. He was convicted and probably will spend the rest of his life in jail. The moral to that story, had the principal at the school my girls were in years back done more than just fired this teacher, reported him, because I had called the police, and the police said that you should have called us when you were at the school. We would have taken care of it then. But had they done something more appropriately at that time, maybe they would have precluded these young second, third, and fourth graders from being abused by this teacher. When I was about 17 years old, I got a job with the LA Times, delivering the morning paper on Sundays and also during the week. So we had to get up really early. And I've always had opportunities to make money. I was making money when I was about, I think, 10 years old. I delivered liquor for the local liquor store, which if you try to do that today, you could get arrested. And I also delivered drugs for our local pharmacists. My mother had a lot of pain in her legs, which turned out to be 10 years later varicose veins. and she was on using something called terpene hydrate, which had codeine in it. And so the pharmacist knew me. I would go pick up her prescriptions. He would call me and say, I'll give you 50 cents if you take a prescription to one of my customers who can't come in and get it. The liquor store would do the same thing. I'll give you 50 cents. And in today's money, that's like saying, I'll give you $10 to walk 3 or 4 blocks, which, which I would do willingly. And any event, same thing with the liquor store. Then I'd get tips from the customers. So I was making money when I was 10 years old. So anyway, when I was about 17, I had this job with the LA Times, delivering these papers, and we had to run these papers through a stringing machine, string them really tight, which we were not that good at doing. I say we because I employed one of my friends. This boy was from New Orleans, and he and his mother were tenants in my parents' apartment building. So I said, okay, he and I could do this together because I'm not very good. Because of my vision, I'm not very good at any mechanical things. And then I had the great idea of borrowing my godfather's convertible Cadillac so we could throw these papers. So anyway, we're out there at, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. I think it was 4 in the morning. I think we had to have them all done by 6 o'clock in the morning. And apparently we didn't wrap these papers, string these papers too tightly, because we started throwing papers and they started coming apart and papers were flying all over the place and we were having a hard time finding the address. And so we didn't get these papers out by the 6 o'clock deadline. And of course the manager was getting calls, and so he came looking for us. And he made the mistake of yelling at me for not getting these papers out on time. And I had previous experience, business experience. I think I was handling business when I was about 16 years old. When people got rude and disrespectful to me, I called him on it right away, and that's what I did with him. He started yelling at me. I said, wait a minute, don't you yell at me. And I said, I'm not taking that nonsense. This job is not worth that kind of treatment. And so he looked at me and he stopped and he said, you would make a good collector. And he said, I'm going to take you off this job, and I have all these bills that people haven't paid for. Some of them are 6 months and 9 months old. They haven't paid their paper bill. And I said, oh, he says, I'll give you, he sorted them out. He says, I'll give you 50% on this group and of what you collect, and 20% and 30% on these groups and so forth. So I took them and I went around to, different customers in the neighborhood. And, I decided I'd go around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening when they got home from work, knocked on the door and said, this is Larry Jackson from the LA Times. I'm collecting for the Times. And most of the people would not have the money at the time that I went to them. So I just basically asked them, well, when will you have the money? And they'd say, well, come on Friday. That's my payday. And I said, okay, what time should I come? And they say, I'll be here at 7 o'clock. And at 7 o'clock on Friday, I was there. And I collected all this money. I think it was maybe $500 or $600 worth of outstanding receivables that this guy had. And so I took them back to him. And one woman stopped me and she says, I wasn't going to pay this bill because your boss came and he was really rude, and he was racially disrespectful. He said some really rude racial things. Now, most of these people that I was collecting money from were African American. There were some Caucasian people, and that was about it in that day and time in our neighborhood. They were either Caucasian or African American, or there were some Creole people in our neighborhood. And so anyway, I went back to the manager, the boss, and I said, okay, I have all these. And he was shocked. He says, how did you collect this? I've been trying to get this one for 6 or 7 months. And I said, well, this lady said that you were rude. And he said, well, I have to embarrass them. And I told him that, why don't you Negroes pay your bills on time? And I said, well, that was the worst thing you could have said. That's a signal for them to say, I'm not paying my bill and this is why. So anyway, that's my experience with that particular job and teaching that manager the appropriate way to speak to people from different cultures. I'll have more to say about this later on in the presentation. I've told you about 15 different stories. Some of them will be included in a version of this video that you received. Some will not. But I haven't told you about our group in grammar school and high school, our group in high school in particular, which was a multicultural group. In our group, different than a lot of cliques in high school, were kids from African American background, Caucasian background, Jewish background, or Oriental, and we said in those days, background. You say Asian today, but in other words, everybody was in our little group, and we all got along really well. But there were some incidents that occurred in our group that you will see if you have the chance to view our play, Overcoming American Ethnic Implicit Bias. It's put out by Shades Connected Interactive. This is a play that gives you the opportunity to express your opinion. Those opinions will be gathered and calculated and presented back to the audience at a later date. And along with those opinions will be workable solutions to how we get rid of, or at least delineate, the inappropriate racial, ethnic, implicit bias, boiled down to basically racism being practiced today. When I was, I believe about 12, 13 years old, somewhere in there, 11, 12, 13, I was a member of the Boy Scouts. And as you know, I'm Catholic. And this scouting troop met on the top of I think a Baptist church. And in those days, the nuns told us we shouldn't go into a church of another denomination. I think they said something like, you go to hell if you did that. That's just not true, and is not something that is taught today. But in any event, we had this Boy Scout troop, and our patrol, I forget what they called them, our little patrol, which was a segment of the group, would go on little outings. And we lived in what is now called the Jefferson Park area, which is a little distance from the Baldwin Hills and the View Park area. Anyway, we decided that one Saturday that we would go on a outing. And so we got our packs together in our canteens and our little this and that. It was just a day outing. We weren't going to be doing any camping or anything. And we found a way into the Baldwin Hills area. And some of the Baldwin Hills area at that time was developed, and some of it was undeveloped. So we found our way into what we thought was the undeveloped area, and we're hiking around in the hills there, and I think we're in a little saddle. And the saddle is, is kind of a little valley with the hills on each side. And at the top of these hills, on the left and on the right, were homes. And the homes had these chain link fences around them. And so we're just walking in there and, kind of like playing Boy Scouts. And the grass is pretty high. It's like shoulder length. And I was, a lot shorter than I am now. But I'm still a tall kid. And all of a sudden we hear, this dog start barking and people on the left are yelling at us, get out of our property. And then the people on the right were yelling at us, get out of our property. And we thought that we were not in anybody's property because the fence lines of each of these properties were at the top of the hill or at the crest of the hill on each side. Today I would know better because we know that property lines can go beyond the fences in hilly areas. But then I was a kid, I didn't know, and we were all kids, we didn't know, we thought we weren't doing anything wrong. So that kind of scared us, and we didn't know what we were going to do. We didn't say anything back to these people. We were just trying to, okay, we need to get out of here. So I kind of backed up into these weeds, and the next thing I knew, I was about 4 feet down because I fell down into a cauldron where there was a drainage, like a manhole drainage area. I guess that's where the water went. So anyway, I got out of there and we trooped out of that area, and now we're in the lower end of Baldwin Hills. And at this time, this was predominantly, I think it was I don't think there were any black people living in that area, any African American people living in the area at that time. I think Ray Charles was living there, but I don't believe there was anybody else living there at that time of African American descent. So we got out of there and we ended up in the lower part of the hills, and we're in an alley, and we're walking through this alley, and people coming out of the alley, get out of our alley, get out of our alley. Oh my gosh, and I'm getting really kind of scared at this point. The other boys, one of the boys that was in our little patrol, an older kid, I think he was ready to become an Eagle Scout. He was having none of it. He says, "Oh, we're not doing anything wrong, and don't pay any attention to those people." Anyway, we got out of there, and I think that was my first experience with negative racial comment or contact with people from another culture. I'll talk more about this later in the presentation. When I was about 15, we had moved from the Jefferson Park area to the Leimert Park area. This is when my parents bought this 14-unit apartment building. And earlier on, I told you that when I was about 3 years old, my birth mother passed away from tuberculosis, the same disease that I had. And I was raised by my mother, who was my mother's oldest sister, my aunt in reality, but I knew her only as my mother, and my maternal grandmother. And my father was in the picture, but he was not living with us. He lived on the east side of town, and his family all lived there on the east side of Los Angeles. And I didn't understand at a young age why that was the way it was, but when I was in college, I got a full grasp of why he lived where he lived and did what he did. He worked for Todd Shipyard his whole life. He never changed jobs. He worked for them when he was from a young man till he retired. And he was an electrician. And I knew that my mother had made him promise to be the only one to cut my hair. I had this jet black, curly, big floppy curly hair, which I think was recessive genes because my great grandmother was Canadian and interracially married to a African American man in the United States, which my grandmother was a product of. So the um, women, well, the children of my grandmother, all of my aunts and uncles were very fair skinned, black curly hair, and that sort of thing. So I had this black curly hair too. And my mother, as I understand it, made my father promise before she died that he would be the only one that would cut my hair. So this was an experience that was an off and on experience. I liked, especially when I got to be in my tweens or teens, I liked to have my hair cut every week or two, and that didn't happen. Sometimes he would show up, and sometimes he wouldn't, and I'll explain that to you in a minute. But in any event, as I said, I'll explain it to you now. As I said, I worked for Todd Shipyard when I was in college one summer, and that's where I understood all the things my dad went through because these were some really, really rough characters. We worked on a ship refurbishing it, the San Jose, that had blown up out in the ocean, and they brought it into Todd Shipyard, and then we repaired it and brought it back to its original conditions. These were some really tough guys. There was a carpenter that was working down in the hull of the ship that had a toolbox, a big heavy toolbox dropped on him from about 5 flights above. And these are the kinds of guys that you're working on. He obviously lost his life over that. So that gave me a good idea of what my dad was dealing with when he was a electrician at Todd Shipyard in Los Angeles. In any event, didn't get my hair cut. About 15 years old, and we're on our way, or going to be on our way to Palo Alto to visit my cousins who lived up in the Bay Area, and I didn't have my hair cut. So I decided we had moved, so I wasn't close to my the barber that would cut my hair if my dad didn't cut it. And so I decided I'd go to this barber that was close to where we lived, and these were in this barber shop were older Caucasian men. So I just went in, sat down, and waiting my turn, reading the magazine, and eventually one of the barbers comes over to me and he says, "I don't think we can cut your hair." And I said, "Oh, I think you can. It's pretty similar to the hair that you're cutting now." Most of those people were older men. And he said, "Well, I'll try to cut it, but I don't think you're going to like it. I did it once before for another Negro boy, I think is what he said. And he didn't like it. He didn't like it." And I said, "Well, just try, because I don't have time to go to the person that would cut my hair. And it's quite a ways away because we moved. And my dad is not available to cut my hair, so could you just please do what you can?" So I sat down in the chair, and he spent about 2 minutes on my hair, and he just butchered it from one side to the other. It was really an intentional act, and I looked a mess. So I didn't know how I looked before I left. I didn't even look in the mirror, but I knew that he wasn't doing an honest job. So I paid him, and paid the cashier and gave him a tip. And then I left, and when I got home, everybody was commenting, "Oh, your hair is a mess, your hair is a mess," and this and that and the other. Anyway, I went to Palo Alto, visited my cousins, and my cousin was just becoming driving age and had a car. Nobody noticed my hair. So that was the essence of that contact with people from another culture. In this segment, I'm going to talk about some more recent experiences with some people from other cultures. In the recent past, have been quite successful, as you probably have seen from my resume if you've seen it. And so successful that I was able to adopt three teenage boys from Guatemala. And at that time, when I had all three of them, we were in a small one bedroom plus den apartment, pretty nice apartment with a swimming pool in the Santa Monica area. Obviously, this was kind of crowded, but I did have it set up pretty good. I had a bunk bed set with a trundle bed underneath, so everybody did have a place to sleep, but they were in a small room. So I was able to, with the real estate market being rather in a bad condition, I was able to negotiate a deal, a lease option deal on a home in the Beverly Hills area. Actually, it was a Los Angeles County area or Los Angeles City area with a Beverly Hills address. So it wasn't within the city of Beverly Hills, but it was called Beverly Hills. So we had this 6,500 square foot home, really nice and roomy. It had some problems, but we were able to deal with those. But everybody had their own bedroom, and we had our cook come in and housekeeper come in. The housekeeper I'd had for 10 years had taken care of me in Santa Monica, so she and another lady would come in and clean the house, and then we had a cook come in and do our cooking. In any event, one of my boys that I adopted, the oldest one, Mauricio, he has hemophilia, and I had gotten him an electric bicycle to help him get around without having to do too much pedaling, especially in the area we lived, which is quite hilly. And one day he came up the hill and he slipped in some sand or something and hit the pavement, and he was really hurt. If you know anything about hemophilia, it's a bleeding disease and you have to be really careful. It's manageable because all you basically have to do is to keep the missing factor in their bloodstream. The factor that they were born without, you keep that in their bloodstream, which means they have to do an infusion about twice a week in his case. So he had gotten had this spill, and he came home and he was upset and he was trying not to cry, but he was crying. And so I got on the phone right away and called the paramedics and had them get here. And then I called his doctor. And I'm talking to her, and she says, "Well, you got to make sure that he hit his head?" And I think he had his helmet on, but he's bruised and so forth. So you got to make sure that he does his infusion. Well, at this point, I think the boys had been with me for about 2 years, so he had learned to do his own infusion, and that was really the goal, to infuse yourself with this medication. And so I called the fire department, the paramedics, and they arrived, and 5 of them come upstairs to where we are. I'm talking to the doctor, and she says, "Well, just make sure that he gets his infusion." And she talks to the fireman, and the paramedic, and she says, "Do you know how to do an infusion?" And he said, "Well, no." And, "What do you know how to do a transfusion or to do an injection?" And he says, "Yes." And so he tries to do that, and he fails, and he misses the vein, which kind of hurts. So Mauricio then takes over and finally does his own infusion. And I'm standing there and telling the paramedics what the history is and so forth. And out of the blue, this Hispanic paramedic asked me, "Just how long have you been living here?" And I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's not an appropriate question. I answered it and told him I think we'd been there for 2 years at that point. But I thought to myself that was inappropriate. And why he asked that question, was there some racial issue going on? What was his problem? So I didn't pay too much attention to that. I just kind of put that in my filing cabinet. And the next incident we have with the Beverly Hills Fire Department is my middle son is going to Beverly Hills High School, and I'm working along. I usually, most of the time, I work at home. I found that I've made more money working at home than I did when I had an office in an office building. So I'm working at home, and I get this call, and the call is a caller I've never heard of, and he says, "I'm so and so, and your son just got hit by a car here on Beverly Drive." And I said, "Which son?" I was trying to figure out who this is. And he tells me it's Trent. And I said, "Oh, I'll be right down there." So I'm really concerned. I didn't really get much information out of this guy as to whether was he hurt or what was his condition. I just got in the car and drove down there. I think it was probably maybe 4 or 5 miles. So I get there, and it's kind of it's in the afternoon after school. And I cut through the traffic and make my left turn against the light and everything. I did a lot of illegal driving at that point, but I got there. And Trent says, "Oh, that's my dad." And there's a police woman there at the time. So I just parked the car, and I'm on my way to see about Trent, if he's hurt or what does he need and that sort of thing. And this fireman comes up and blocks me. And he says, "I need you to sign this document denying transportation or refusing transportation." And I said, "Well, I need to see my son." And he says, "Well, he's got blood all over his hands and he can't sign it. And so I need for you to sign it." And I said, I'm thinking to myself, why is this guy blocking me? What is his problem? Doesn't he know that I'm a parent and I'm concerned about my son? And I said, "Give me that thing." I didn't even read it. I just signed it. I said, "Here, take this and get out of my way." And so I finally got over to where he was. Then the cop, the lady policeman, she tells me, "You got to move your car." I'm going, "What is wrong with you?" Okay, all right, I'll move my car. So I move the car and I come back and I see him, and he's okay. He's got bandage around his head. He hit his head when the car hit him and knocked him off his skateboard and knocked him about 20 feet, and he hit the ground and hit his head. So he was bleeding from head wounds are a lot of blood comes out of your head when you have a head wound. But, in the analysis of the whole thing, is wondering, the first incident with the fire department, why is this guy asking me how long have I lived in this house? Well, it was a really nice house. I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe he should have said, "You have a nice home," but he wanted to know how long I lived there. The other fireman that was blocking my way, I'm thinking to myself, well, if his hands were bloody, why didn't you get some material and clean his hands off? Why is it so important to you that I sign off on this document? And point in fact, he was 18 at that time. He could have signed it himself. So at that point, I'm getting kind of annoyed and wondering what's going on here. I called the fire chief and I told him what the situation was. And I said, "I think your firemen have racial problems. I think that they had a problem with me living in Beverly Hills and living in a really nice home, driving a really nice car and being successful, and they couldn't handle it, and this is the way they dealt with it." And I said, "It's inappropriate. We are in California. We are subject to the Unruh Act, which means that private businesses and public businesses must treat people of all ethnic groups equally." And I said, "That's not what was happening here." I said, "If it was your son, you being a white person, and you were trying to get to your son, they wouldn't have blocked your way. 2 people blocked my way, and this third person in the other incident was so concerned as to how I was living in this a 6,500 square foot house. And so I said to the fire chief, I said, I want this investigated. I said, if it happens again, I am going to file a complaint and I am going to talk to my lawyers about filing a lawsuit in terms of dealing with the Unruh Act, because your fire department is not acting appropriately. So on top of that, to add insult to injury, um, they sent me a bill for, I think it was like $700 or $800. And I said, wait a minute, what is this? And I called the fire chief back and he said, well, I have the power to dismiss that bill. He says, I'm guessing that your son didn't call for the fire department or for the paramedics. I'm guessing someone else did. And I said, yeah, I think that's probably what happened. Well, that would make him not responsible. And so if you want me to void that, and I said, well, I don't want to, if there's something that I have to pay, I want to pay it, but I want this matter dealt with appropriately. I don't want this to happen again. And I told you before, if it does happen, this is going to be my plan to resolve the issue so that it doesn't happen to me anymore or to any other minority person. I said, your firemen have to realize that there are successful people of color, and that's just the way it is. They worked hard. I worked hard and a long time to get to the level of success that I reached, and I shouldn't be insulted by people who are either jealous or have some problem with their inferiority relative to other people who are successful. This segment is on housing discrimination. Not too far back, we were looking for an apartment. And this era, there were a lot of apartments on the market. So it was a buyer's market or a renter's market. And we were looking in Beverly Hills because that's where my kids were going to school. And we had to have Beverly Hills residency, otherwise they couldn't go to the Beverly Hills school. So we did that trek. Several apartments we looked at, we would get a call back saying, whoa, we rented the apartment to somebody else. And, very nice, and you this and that and the other, you have a lot of good resume and credit and blah, 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 but we rented the apartment to somebody else. So there was one apartment that we made a reservation to look at. We got there, and the manager of the apartment was on vacation, so his boss showed us the apartment. His boss his name was Jose. And I told Jose about the boys that I had adopted, and he said, oh, well, you got the apartment. So we got the apartment, moved in, and so forth. And the actual manager came back from vacation. And as we were moving in, I got a note on my door, a rather nasty note, and the note said, "Get your trash out of my planter." And I'm thinking, okay, did anybody put trash in someplace it wasn't supposed to be? And I asked everybody, no, we didn't have any trash. We had hamburgers, but all our hamburger wrappers are in the trash can in the house. And so, okay, I just let that kind of go. And then the next thing, I get a note on my car saying something about my car is blocking or is not all the way in the stall and keeping someone from pulling out of their space. Well, the spaces were at least 20, maybe 30 feet apart, one row to another. In other words, there was about a 30-foot gap between one row of cars and another row of cars. plenty of room to pull your car out. I didn't see why there was that note on my car. Then the next thing happens is I get a note on my door from the returning manager saying that there was a white trash can in front of our apartment, which we did not put there. It apparently belonged to the people that were there before us. And that needed to be removed because it wasn't to the decor of the apartment building. So I said, well, this is getting kind of ridiculous now. I looked across the way, and here's a screen that is supposed to be on a window that's across the corridor to our apartment, just laying there. And I had seen this screen had been there for about a week, maybe 2 weeks. So I took a picture of that, and I wrote a note back, and I said, I removed the trash can from where you said it was. It wasn't our trash can, but I removed it anyway. And I said, by the way, this screen has been off the window for over a week, and nothing has been done about that. Is that to your apartment building's decor? So one thing led to another, and finally, I found out who this was writing these notes. This is woman next door to us, this Eastern European woman, and she was not very nice and really kind of frowned and scowled at us and that sort of thing. What is wrong with this person? Well, on the other side of her were a family, 2 teenage boys and their parents living in the apartment on the other side of her. And these boys were very nice to me. We spoke all the time and so forth, but they were a little rowdy, kind of on their own, latchkey, so to speak. And on Fridays they would party. And apparently they were drinkers, and they were underage drinkers, but they were drinkers and didn't know how to handle it because they had vomited all over the carpet right next to this woman's apartment on the other side of us. And she comes over and blames our dog and says, your dog is vomited on the carpet. When are you going to clean it up? And I'm thinking, I didn't say the right thing. I should have said it wasn't our dog. But I said, you can go talk to the manager. He can tell you when it's going to get cleaned up. I'm not cleaning it up. And one thing led to another. She got really nasty. And I said, listen, if you don't stop it, I'm going to have to talk to my lawyer and file a lawsuit against you. You can't be doing this. And so that didn't faze her at all. She says, you just go ahead. And I said, okay, this woman is being really crazy. So I decided I'm just going to call the police and let them handle it. So I called the police, and they came and they said, well, what she's doing is not illegal, but she is not being a good neighbor. And I said, well, would you just go over and talk to her and tell her that it's not our dog that was doing this. None of the things that she accused us of had we done. And, I really think she has a racial problem because none of the other tenants there, none of the other apartment dwellers there behaved like she did. So they did. They went over and talked to her, and that's how I resolved that problem. She never bothered us again. This segment is on employment discrimination. After I graduated from high school, actually 6 months from high school, after I graduated from college, actually 6 months before I graduated from college, I had an offer to work for a international certified public accounting firm. And I took that offer. It was a pretty good offer. And our major client at that time was General Motors. That went pretty well without any employment discrimination problems until the economy tanked, and that's when issues started to happen. So I left Boise Cascade at that time. I left H&S at that time. The employment discrimination laws are not very strong, and I didn't know that much about employment discrimination, but I knew something had happened and I didn't know how to deal with it. I went to work for Boise Cascade, and they were having problems with receivables, real estate contracts that they had entered into with a real estate developer in a partnership, and all of these contracts were in default. People hadn't paid their second mortgages. So they put me on the team to do an audit on these receivables to see exactly where they stood. Well, they brought down two guys from Idaho who were, in my opinion, not used to the metropolitan area of Los Angeles and people of color. So much so, they make a lot of insensitive remarks that were inappropriate, but I was young at the time and really didn't know how to deal with them. One of the remarks was, you guessed it, why don't you black people pay your bills? So I had to explain to them what the situation was in regards to the economy, and that I am not responsible for all minority people, whether they pay their bills or not. And what you said was inappropriate. This went on for a few weeks until I decided that this was not a place for me to work. And that's about the time that I started my practice. This segment is on airline travel. When I was traveling back and forth from the United States to Guatemala to visit my boys during the adoption period, which in most cases was about 2 years, because I have experience with dealing with government entities. I've dealt with government entities all my life, city, county, state, and federal. I was able to deal with them effectively. I kind of know how government employees think and what motivates them, since I was a government employee when I was a kid. So anyway, we did the visit. We had a really nice time, and we took the boys swimming and so forth, and had lots of good meals at the Camino Real Hotel, and just had a really nice time. So I'm on my way back home, and I had the United Airlines round trip reservations. I had business class, which is one rung below first class. So you get to sit in the first class cabin in the last row, but you're in the first class cabin and you get everything first class passengers get, which is even silverware, real silverware, and glasses, and the food is it's okay, it's airline food. Anyway, we're flying. They've got taken off, and they're serving us dinner, and the hostess, the stewardess or flight attendant, she comes to me and she says, "Well, what would you like?" And she tells me what they have, and I said, "I can't have anything with milk in it. I'm lactose intolerant." So she reads off everything. Everything has milk in it. I said, "Oh, well, I don't know what I'm going to have." And she kind of frowns, and I kind of say, "Well, just whatever you have that doesn't have any milk in it." And she kind of just goes back to her station. So I'm having my meal. I finish everything. During the course of the meal, there's a little turbulence, and my glass falls on the floor and breaks. And the person sitting next to me had gotten up to go to the restroom, and I was concerned that when she came back, she might step on this broken glass. So I rang the bell, and nothing happens. And I can see her from where I'm sitting. She's not that far away in that first class cabin. She's just kind of ignoring me. So I rang it again. and she still doesn't respond. And I rang it a third time, and then here she comes stomping over to the area, and she says, "You need to stop ringing that bell." I said, "Well, there's a problem here." I kind of got shocked. I said, "There's a problem here. The glass I had fell on the floor, and there's broken glass all over here." And the lady sitting next to me, she's in the restroom. She come back, he'll step on the glass, so it needs to be cleaned up. She says, "Well, I had a broken glass myself, and you uh, uh, don't stop bothering me. I'm going to tell the captain." I said, "Wow, you just go ahead and tell the captain. My complaint is legitimate, and you are behaving inappropriately." And so, and this was happening almost to where we were in Los Angeles. In other words, we were almost home when this was happening. We were over the California area. She does. She comes and cleans up the mess, and she's scowling and so forth and so on. I'm saying this is really inappropriate behavior to myself, and I said I'm just going to complain about this. And so the captain comes over the loudspeaker and he says, "We're going to have to go. We're having a problem. We're going to have to stay in flight or stay in our flying pattern for about 30 minutes, and then we'll land." And I'm thinking to myself, they must have complained about me to the marshal's office. I'm sitting there, and we finally land, and everybody boards the plane. I said, "I'm going to stay on to be the last person off, and maybe I'll work up the courage to complain to the captain." So I did, and I was the last person off, but I chickened out. I didn't complain to the captain. So I went home, and I'm still thinking about this behavior. And I said, "I'm going to complain." So I did. I called the airline, and I wrote a letter. And then I called the airline and to follow up on the letter, and I said, "This was inappropriate behavior. I shouldn't have been treated that way." They even asked me in immigration, he said, "How was your flight?" Because they keyed in my name. And I said, "My visit was great. The kids had a really good time and so forth, but my flight was really not very good, and I'm going to file a complaint about it." And so I did, and I wrote the letter, and they called me and wrote me back and said that the stewardess had said that I was the problem, that she wasn't the problem, and her co-partners, her co-workers had agreed that I was the problem, that I didn't like the airline food and so forth and so on. I said, in other words, they lied. So I said, "Okay, I know what to do next time. I'm going to get a pair of those glasses with the hidden camera in it so that when something like this happens again, I'll have it on recording. And when they lie about it, I'll say, here it is on tape. Now, how are you going to lie about that?" Next incident, this is American Airlines this time. And at that point, I decided I would never take United Airlines again. And I haven't. I've never taken United Airlines. This is American Airlines, and I had really good service with American Airlines. I visited the boys about 5 or 6 times and took American Airlines or TACA, the Hispanic Airlines, and never had a problem. Always good service with the flight attendants and stewardess and so forth were very nice to me and so forth. Until one day I got on the plane, and this wasn't a flight attendant, although the flight attendant was cursorily involved, peripherally involved in this incident. You get your ticket and you're assigned a seat. And at this point, I was going low budget. So, so I got economy class. And I'm getting on the plane, you got your seat assigned to you. And I find my seat, and there's a guy sitting on the aisle seat. Mine is in the center seat. And he is a Caucasian guy, and he goes, "Oh no, with all these seats on the airline, you chose to sit here?" And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't choose to sit here. This is what they assigned me to sit in. And I said, "Well, I don't think you're talking to me, because people don't talk to me like you're speaking to me." And he says, "I'm talking to you, and you're acting like a H is what he said. And I said, okay, I don't need to be taking this kind of behavior. So I rang the stewardess, trying to find the stewardess, and I'm having trouble with the button. And he said, that's your problem right there. You can't see straight, or so forth. Now he's on my case about my disabilities. Sound familiar? I think that's kind of what's happening today. And so I said, okay, I'm not going to say anything. Just wait till the stewardess gets here. She got there, and I told her what the problem was. I told her what he said, and this is where she made the inappropriate remark. She says, I'm not either one of your mothers, so I can't really solve your problems. And I said, well, you need to solve this problem because this is an inappropriate behavior. And so she said, well, just a minute, I'll come back. I'm going to fix this. So she came back, and he was talking to her outside my earshot. And they made some kind of deal, and they moved his seat. And I said, well, that's good. So when she came back, I said, can I have his seat? Because that would mean there would be an empty center seat, and that would give us more room. And she agreed, okay, yeah, you can have that, and just, ran on off. I started to make a complaint about that, but I thought she wasn't the initial problem. He was the problem. And I think it was dealt with appropriately or as best it could be dealt with at that time. And I said that would be sufficient results for me. Now that was prior to some of the incidents that had happened on American Airlines that were deemed to be racially motivated. The airlines, in my opinion, have a long way to go to customer service. They're not what they used to be in terms of customer service. Most of the time, I had gotten pretty good service. I do remember way back when I was working for the international accounting firm and going to New York, and my cousin worked for the airlines that I was taking, and I went up to the desk and I said, do you know where my cousin, I ditched his name, you know where he works? He works for this airline. He's rather dark-skinned African-American guy. And they looked at me and they said, well, if he works here, he's got to be in the baggage department. And I thought, okay, that was kind of an inappropriate thing to say, but I won't comment. That was way back in the 70s. That's when I went to New York and we had a dinner in the partners' private club where the women were not allowed. So the women that they hired as junior accountants in that day had to enter the club for this dinner through the back door. Can you imagine that? I said to myself, if they had told me that I would go through the back door to go to this dinner, I wouldn't be going to that dinner. But they did. They went to the dinner, and that's what happened in those days. Anyway, that's what I have to say about this particular issue. I'll have more to say about this in another video. This segment is on service discrimination. As I have said in previous segments in regards to respect or disrespect, the three elements of disrespect: tone of voice, gestures, and content of speech are the three elements of disrespect. A lot of it starts off with tone of voice, and then coupled with that is the content of speech. You don't see gestures very much. An example of gestures that are inappropriate and disrespectful, if you remember the first O.J. Simpson trial, Marcia Clark, the prosecutor, when she would disagree with the judge's ruling, she would roll her eyes to the extent that Judge Ito had to say, there will be no eye rolling in my courtroom. That's a sign of disrespect and an element of inconsideration, because this judge can lock you up if you're inappropriate. And that's the last thing you want in your life. And so courtroom behavior, as I said in one of the other segments, should be very respectful from both sides of the bench and the railing. In this particular segment, I'm going to be talking about hospitals. Uh, as you know, I have one of my boys has a health issue with hemophilia. So we initially started off at Children's Hospital, and we're up trying to get his infusion, and this is before he learned to do his own infusions. And we're getting a lot of static. Well, you need this document and this document, you need this signed and this signed. And it was okay, so we went over and we took care of that, and we came back to where he's supposed to get his infusion. Well, now you need this and you need that. Well, my son is getting kind of irritated. I mean, and I'm getting a little irritated, but not as irritated as he is. And we come back again, and now you need something else. And I'm saying to myself, why didn't you tell us all of this the first time around so we wouldn't have to be running back and forth? And I said, if this happens again, we're going to leave. We come back, and it happens again. And I said, that's it. We're leaving. And she says, well, you don't want to leave before you get your infusion. I said, you want to? She says, you're not leaving. I said, you want to bet? Watch us. And we walked right out. And at that point, I called Children's Hospital. I called actually the Hemophilia Foundation. I said, is Children's Hospital the only hospital that we can go to? I said, we're having problems there. And I think that these problems have to do with racial issues. My son and I are brown skinned, and the person helping us what's causing the problems is Caucasian. And I don't think she would be causing the problems if we were Caucasian. So they said, well, yeah, you can go to the orthopedic hospital. So I transferred everything from Children's Hospital to orthopedic hospital. So he's got a really good team of doctors over at orthopedic, and they're doing a really good job of treating us really nicely and so forth and so on. No problems at all. Until a family that I am close to, which I consider almost a part of our family, is not having good financial success. And so I'm helping them. And one of their boys has something wrong with his foot. And I knew they didn't have insurance. I knew they didn't have the wherewithal to go to the doctor. Anyway, they went to a podiatrist, and the podiatrist is recommending things that it seemed to me were not appropriate for the problem that he was having. So I said, listen, you need to go to an orthopedic surgeon to look at this foot. The podiatrist is not going to do as much as the orthopedic surgeon's going to do. And I said, I have a contact at the hospital that my son is going to. I'll call over there and set it all up. And so I call over there and I tell them that what the situation is, and I tell them that they don't have medical insurance, and they don't, they're not able to afford. And that's when I learned that any of the major hospitals that are a nonprofit hospital, because of their status, they have to take you whether you can pay them or not. They have some agreement with the government that they have to take you and they have to give you service. And so I tell the mother of the boy that this is what we're going to do. I set it all up, and I go over there, and I know quite a few of the doctors there and so forth, and I called my doctor that takes care of my son, and I told him what the situation was, and she said, they'll take you, don't worry about it. They'll take her, and she won't have to pay. So we get there, and I tell them what the situation is, and the gal behind the counter is helping us, and I said, now she doesn't have, I already set this up, and she doesn't have insurance, and she's not able to pay, and you're supposed to be able to do this at no cost. And she kind of mumbles something. She's a Hispanic woman, and my friend with her son, they're also Hispanic. And she mumbles something, and I said, well, what'd you say? What'd you say? And she mumbled it again. I said, wait a minute, I didn't hear what you say it again. And then when she finally said it, so that I could hear it, what she said is, well, we'll just send you a bill. I said, no, 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 no. You're not supposed to send her a bill. She's supposed to get this service at no cost. And so she says, well, wait a minute, let me go talk to my supervisor. So she comes back and she says, all you have to do is fill out this form and you'll get the service at no cost. I said, all right. So she filled out the form and we were waiting. They put us in a room, we're waiting for the doctor to come in, who is the chief of the whole hospital. He's the head of the whole hospital who's going to treat this boy. He's an orthopedic surgeon and he is the president who runs the whole hospital. And so we're waiting, and then in comes this woman, and she says, I am a nurse practitioner, and I'll be able to help you. And I said, no, that's not what we agreed to do. I have an appointment with Dr. So-and-so. He's the head of the hospital, and that's who I want these people to see. So she says, kind of frowns, and she says, well, he's going to tell you the same thing I'm going to tell you. And I said, that may be, but that's who we agreed to see, and that's who I want to see. That's who I want him to see. And so she kind of frowns, and she says, well, okay, he says to get him undressed with everything, all his clothes off except his underwear, and put this gown on. So I'm helping getting him undressed and so forth. He's about 6 or 7 years old at this time, maybe 8. And the problem with his foot, as I saw, was that he's flat-footed. So I'm speaking to his mother, and I put my hand under his foot to say, see, I think he's flat-footed. That's what the problem is. And then this nurse practitioner, she yells, get your hand off his foot. And I go, oh my goodness, what is her problem? So I did. I took my hand off his foot, and I thought this was very inappropriate behavior. And the doctor comes in, and he does the examination, and he says what he has, he'll grow out of, and he says the implement that the podiatrist gave him, he can use it, but it's not going to help him. What will really help him is these exercises that I'm going to give him. And so that's resolved, and that's in June is when that happens. And, dealing with these issues of inappropriate behavior, which stems from what I think is a racial problem, takes a lot of time out of your day to deal with. I usually write a very comprehensive letter. I explain everything that happened. I point out what is inappropriate, and I tell them that they need to deal with it. Well, at that time, I was really busy, and I didn't deal with this problem at that time. It took 3 months before I had the time to deal with it, and it was in September when I wrote a letter. I wrote a letter. In the letter, I said that I got this appointment through my son's doctor. We were supposed to see the chief orthopedic surgeon, which we did, but I said this nurse practitioner was really inappropriate. What she did made me look like I was doing something inappropriate, and all I did was put my hand underneath this boy's foot to demonstrate his flat-footedness. And what she did was inappropriate. And in my letter, I said this: my son gets his medication from your hospital, and you and I both know that the special medication he gets costs $20,000 a year. I'm sorry, $20,000 a month. And I know the hospital makes a good profit off of that. And I deal with organizations based on how they treat me. When I see that an organization is treating me inappropriately, I boycott that organization. When I see that organizations are treating me with the appropriate respect, then and seem to be uh, racially accepted, then I support that organization. And I said, something needs to be done about her behavior. Her behavior was inappropriate. And if something isn't done, we will change hospitals just like we changed from Children's Hospital. I got a call immediately from the head of the hospital, the same doctor that examined my friend's son. And the first thing he said was, "I'm glad that you brought this to our attention." And I did say in the letter that she should apologize to me and apologize to the family that was there getting the service, whether they were paying for the service or not. That behavior was inappropriate. And he said that she no longer works for the hospital. And I said, well, if she ever applies again, you should not hire her. And he said, but I am glad that you brought this to our attention, because this kind of behavior we will not allow to happen. And if it does happen again, you let us know right away. And I had said to him that I had let it go for 3 months because I was very, very busy. And these kinds of things, when they do happen, it takes a considerable amount of time to draft the appropriate letter, explain everything that happened, and have some kind of resolution in regards to correcting the matter. So that was what happened in the auspices of a hospital. You have seen a number of different videos. There will be a very long version of this because I think there's 23 different segments. One video will be a long video with all of the segments, and another video will be an abbreviated video of of some of the segments. In finality, what the objective of this video is to give you an overview of how things happen and how things were not dealt with in my early years and how things are dealt with now in my retirement years. This is a preview of how we are going to be addressing problems that occur and that have occurred, and how they were addressed and how they are addressed in the movie Shades Connected Interactive: Overcoming American Implicit Bias, to solve the problems of today that we see coming from Washington, D.C. and other areas of the country. So, in the final analysis, the bottom line is we've made it affordable for everyone to get online tickets at $5 a ticket to see this play in the privacy of your home, and then to respond to our questionnaire so that we can gather the responses of all the audience across the nation, share those responses with you, and come up with some workable solutions as to how to deal with racial injustice, racial bigotry, racial intolerance, so that we get to the point that we are surrounding ourselves with people who are racially accepted. Racially acceptance is our final goal. So with that, I will let you go to the area in this give out that allows you to opt for the election of becoming part of the program. The first part is just a reservation. There is no commitment involved until we know that we have 10,000 people who want to see the play on an online basis in the privacy of your home. That will take care of the cost of paying the actors, and we will move forward from there there are going to be some in-theater seats available for this play in a number of different venues. and we will advise you of that as we go forward. Thank you very much for listening, and have a nice day.